It is Wednesday, November 27th, 2019. It is 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and so you know what time it is. It's time for a little bit of coin metal. And it was a very, I'm not sure how to categorize this Wednesday's Get Your Ass Kicked at Jiu-Jitsu Wednesday. It was certainly a lot of basics, and I enjoyed that about it. We had a relatively newer guy to class, and there was only 4 of us. It was relatively absent. I guess that's where I'm drawing my lack of ability to classify, because there wasn't a whole lot of ass kicking being done. It's fine. Got to have those classes every once in a while where you're just really firming up on the basic stuff. We covered some stuff from the butterfly guard, and I thought that was pretty useful because, like I said, we had a newer gentleman. He'd only done 2 classes, and so newer is the word. And so yeah, to new guys, right? But we had a good class nonetheless. I tried to do my best to provide a dummy for my instructor, and all of that. Do my duty as the highest ranking person in class, which it's kind of an odd feeling, because I can remember when I was in that white belt shoes, no stripes or anything like that, just 3rd class. I remember that time well, although I don't believe that I had any classes when I was that young along in jiu-jitsu where I only had 3 other people in class. But it was 2 guys, 2 girls, so, it was pretty even pairings, and so I just worked with him for the whole class, and that was a lot of fun in and of itself. But, I really tried to address the instruction being given as kind of like the neophyte, somebody brand new to it. So I was paying very close attention to the instructor, trying to soak in everything he was communicating to me. And, I found a little bit of a glitch in my game. So, it's I think it's one of those things where I just let the ego go and just, enjoyed the moment and was able to derive a little diamond from it. And I think that's something that we don't take enough time to do, where we get all caught up in stuff and where we think we need to go and what we think we need to do and and you got this mental model kind of setting your performance for you, and so yeah, like I said, I felt really good going back over the stuff that we did today, because like I said, I feel like I got something useful out of it. But anyway, as far as I'm going to keep it short just like that, because like I said, there's 4 people in class. I mean, we didn't do anything that was like really, really high end or anything like that. But the maintenance of points of contact, that was something where I noticed that I have a little bit of difficulty that I need to work on, mostly in maintaining distance from the seated butterfly to standing opponent positions. So, yeah. Anywho, as far as what we're going to throw down, we're going to start off with some body count, because that's just what we do. But as far as what dance? It's been raining a lot lately, so here it is. Raining in blood. Body count. Here on Coin Metal.
Explain body count is a band I put together.
And that was Meshuggah with Concatenation. Concatenation? I don't know. It's a mathematic thing, man. It just means it all resolves in the end, which it always does. Anyway, got this quick thing here on Forbes that I wanted to get into before we get too deep, and I think this explains something. And I've noticed this recently on crypto Twitter, and if you've been around long enough, you certainly have as well. And it seems like it happens whenever there is a new, hyper-rich party from traditional banking that comes into cryptocurrencies. See, they all have this mindset from when they were in a market where they were the only people that got to tell everybody else how to do shit. And if you don't like it, tough titty. If it goes wrong, sorry, guy, there's a regulatory body that'll come after me someday for it, maybe. And they've been dragging that same attitude towards other potential competitors to cryptocurrency. And it's kind of obvious when they come in, because they bring all these little neophytes with them that have the same mindset. You know, and so they come into crypto and they start talking shit to people that have been here for fucking years about how wonderful their shit is, or specifically how wonderful Bitcoin is. We used to call them Bitcoin maximalists. I'm just going to call them banker whores from now on, because that seems to be what they follow. Is bankers come into Bitcoin and they get a whole bunch of neophytes coming in. So, yeah, banker whores. That seems appropriate. Although I'm not prone to discriminating against anybody in particular, and I'll tell you why. Because unlike the marketplace that they're coming here from, they don't have any such monopoly. As a matter of fact, the people that they compete against are your next door neighbor's kid. Your next door neighbor's kid is doing pull requests. Maybe not for Bitcoin, but maybe for other coins. Your next door neighbor's kid is mining. Your next door neighbor's kid is trading. These are the people that they're competing against, and they fucking hate it. They fucking hate it. They're the people that keep talking about, oh, we need regulatory clarity. What regulatory clarity means is kick everybody else the fuck out of this shit. That's a fucking euphemism. It's make the shit to where only we can play in it and make money off of it. Fuck everybody else. You know, they're used to using the state as some sort of cudgel over everybody else's head, including the market. Unfortunately for them, like I said, your next door neighbor's kid is kicking their ass on the fucking exchanges right now. Your next door neighbor's kid is front running their miners. You know, that is what's happening out there. And so, you know, when they bring that kind of attitude in here and they're talking all kinds of shit about altcoins, they're saying, don't pay any attention to our competitors, even though they can do everything that we can do, and they can probably do it faster and cheaper because they don't have a whole bunch of regulatory cruft to deal with. And it'll be just as fast, if not faster, and probably even cheaper. And on top of that, there won't be any record of it. But we're going to rat you out. You know, being nice little regulated entities, they cannot afford to not rat you out. It's like part of their business model and shit. Anyway, so, like I said, every once in a while, one of these monkeys creeps into crypto. And I think that's happened again. Because there's like this wave of Bitcoin maximalism going on. And most of the people that they're talking shit about right now are Ethereum. You know, they're like really coming down hard on Vitalik and stuff. And it's mostly because Ethereum does everything that their fucking sidechain bullshit does. As a matter of fact, it's like it would have been incorporated into Bitcoin if Bitcoin wasn't taken over by a bunch of fucking bankers at the developer level. And that's just my feeling on that. I think at the very least they hold some level of undue influence in the developer community of Bitcoin. And I'll just put it at that. My favorite thing about that, and this is just like one of those little known secrets, is that eventually that funding runs out. Eventually that funding runs out. Continuing on, I got this thing here. It's on Forbes.com. And this is authored on November 27th, 2019 at 10:20 p.m. I guess that's probably like Eastern Standard Time. Move over Jack Dorsey and Elon Musk. There's a new Bitcoin believer in Silicon Valley. This is by Billy Bambreau. And let's see. So yes, penis. Here we go. Bitcoin's epic 2017 bull run was at least partly inspired by interest in Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and blockchain from the world's biggest banks and financial institutions. No, Billy, it wasn't. Actually, most of it was driven by people like you and me, but we're not going to go there. This year, it was the turn of tech companies to boost Bitcoin. After falling sharply in 2018, the Bitcoin price rallied hard in the first half of 2019 due to tech companies from social media giant Facebook to iPhone maker Apple eyeing Bitcoin and crypto. Now, with the likes of Tesla's Elon Musk and Twitter's Jack Dorsey talking up Bitcoin, PayPal chief executive Don Schulman has revealed he's a Bitcoin believer. I'm going to save it. Quote, yes, only Bitcoin, Schulman said. Schulman told Fortune magazine in response to being asked whether he holds any cryptocurrencies. Schulman's attitude to Bitcoin and crypto reflects the wider market. Not really. With many increasingly confident Bitcoin will remain the largest and most popular cryptocurrency. Bitcoin's dominance, its value compared to the whole cryptocurrency market, has risen this year as so-called altcoins are sold off. Bitcoin dominance now sits at around 65%, up from around 50% at the beginning of the year, according to CoinMarketCap data. Schulman, who was speaking to the magazine after he pulled PayPal out of Facebook's troubled Libra cryptocurrency project, also confirmed earlier reports that the company has teams working on blockchain and cryptocurrency. Quote, we think there's a lot of promise to blockchain technology, Schulman said. It's intriguing to us, but it really needs to do something that the traditional rails can't do. It already does that. We replace the traditional rails, asshole. Continuing. On the crypto side, it's still very volatile. No, it's on the fiat side that it's very volatile. And therefore, we don't have much demand for it by merchants because merchants operate on very small margins. Yeah, that's exactly why they should be using Bitcoin. Continuing. Quote, that doesn't mean that I don't think crypto is an interesting idea, more commodity-like than it is cash-like right now. But you can think of use cases in different countries and different places where it can be more stable than the alternatives, like the US. Many in the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency industry were excited by Schulman's revelation, taking it as an endorsement of Bitcoin and its potential. Quote, Bitcoin CEO owns Bitcoin, that's it, no other crypto, only Bitcoin, said crypto investor and co-founder of Morgan Creek Digital Assets, Anthony Pompliano, via Twitter, adding a fire emoji. Yeah, like I give a rat's, that's what he says. In June, PayPal was revealed to be one of Facebook's 28 founding members of the Libra Association, but the company backed out in October, along with payments rivals Visa, MasterCard, and Stripe. Facebook, the world's largest social media network that includes messaging app WhatsApp and image-based Instagram, is scrambling to make its June 2020 launch date for its Bitcoin rival Libra against mounting regulatory scrutiny and internal strife. Yeah, by the time they get to the finish line, Libra isn't going to have any banking, or as a matter of fact, I don't think they currently do. They've already lost all of their contact with the digital payments sector. So anyway, I wanted to touch back on who this asshole really is. And I shouldn't call him an asshole because I've never met him, but this guy, PayPal. Whether you've been paying attention or not, you know what PayPal just did? We talked about this last week. The episode I got up on my YouTube channel, censoring your paycheck. Yeah, that was about PayPal deciding for some arbitrary reason to cancel services to hundreds of thousands of artists that were receiving their payments via PayPal. This is the asshole, guy that wants you to say, oh, I'm only going to use Bitcoin so I can keep guys like him happy. Do you really care about making people like him happy or keeping them happy? Not me. I didn't get into this thing to make other people happy. I got into this thing to make me happy. And what makes me happy is not having to depend on somebody who, for whatever reason, can say, oh, I'm not going to process your digital payments because you're violating my morality code or some other bullshit like that. That's why we use Bitcoin on-chain. Because using it off-chain, you're going to have to depend eventually on somebody like him. And this is a trap that I see a lot of people in Bitcoin simply ignoring. You know, they look at these transaction fees that they're paying that are 50 cents, and they think they're getting some sort of deal. The matter of fact, the fact of the matter is that when we started this thing, they were sub-penny, and it wasn't simply a matter of there were so fewer people using it. That's not really the case. There's probably fewer people using Bitcoin now. The case is that Bitcoin, for the most part, has been kind of derailed, and all of the people that were really interested in Bitcoin found that out the hard way by trying to do Bitcoin the way Bitcoin was designed to be done, which is you download the software to some fucking piece of hardware that you've got, download the blockchain, and fire up a miner. They tried it that way and they figured out, gosh, this is pretty tough. And they started looking around for other options, and then they found altcoins. And see, that's exactly the progression that people like this guy want you to not like conceptualize, because there was something that happened a long time ago when Bitcoin first started out. Well, actually, not when it first started out. Maybe a couple years after it first started out. Once we figured out that Bitcoin worked and that we could transact monetary value to pretty much anybody on the planet in 10 minutes and have it settled globally within that 10 minutes, as soon as we figured that out, it's like, okay, let's take this to the races and see what else this baby can do. And that was back in like 2011, 2012. That's when the first altcoins started. And it was because there were some people within the Bitcoin space, even back then, who were saying, hey, you know, if we make this little tweak here and this little tweak there, we could be little rent suckers where we're getting paid on everybody's transactions, and they won't have any choice but to go through us because we'll just dominate all the block space. And somebody said, well, how's that going to be possible? There's no limit on the amount of block space. And so an emergency was created. A fix, that 1 megabyte block size limit, was employed. And we've been stuck under that ever since. Because those people that first suggested that block size limit, they never had any intention to remove it. No. They wanted to use that as the choke point, whereby they could force the fees to go up, or actually without any effort, the fees would go up. The value of Bitcoin goes up, the value per Satoshi goes up, versus dollars or other fiat currencies, which means invariably over time you are going to be paying more to be transacting those same Satoshis. That was way back before we even hit a penny on transaction fees. And so we're dealing with this still now, because 8 years have gone by and we're still at a megabyte size block size limit. Now the demand for that block space has increased significantly, and the price for that block space has increased significantly because there hasn't been an expansion in the amount of block size available to match the number of users out there, which would have happened if more of us were mining. I believe, at least. And I do believe that more of us will mine in the future. Right now, everybody can still think of it as a joke. They can still point at miners and say, oh, you guys are a bunch of assholes. But it's because they haven't been tested yet. Bitcoin will be tested. Every once in a while I see something on my Twitter feed about, with 11 hours and 66,000 AWS instances, I could do this to the Bitcoin network. Once the incentive becomes high enough, there's going to be somebody out there who's mapped out an exploit, been verifying this whole time that it hasn't been caught, and is waiting to throw down that coup de grace once Bitcoin becomes worth enough to do it. It's all a matter of incentives. Once the incentives are matched, that's when party time begins. So yeah. Speaking of, I got this thing, it's on shiftgold.com. Peak irony. Fed paper admits Fed policy can lead to economic ruin. We're probably going to get into that paper today. And this is authored November 27th, 2019 by Michael Meharry. So yes, penis. A paper by Scott A. Bulla and Caitlin Ferking. Wow. For the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis warns that the Fed's own policy could lead to, quote, economic ruin. The paper, titled Making Sense of National Debt, explains the pros and cons of national borrowing in typical Keynesian fashion. In a nutshell, a little debt is a good thing, but too much debt can become a problem. But in the process of explaining national debt, Walla and Furky stumble into an ugly truth. Federal Reserve money printing can destroy a country's economy. So when does the national debt become a problem? According to Walla and Furking, debt only becomes an issue when it outpaces GDP, or national income as they call it. If debt grows at a faster rate than income, eventually the debt might become unsustainable. They note that according to the GAO, the U.S. national debt is on an unsustainable path. Quote, the federal debt is projected to grow at a faster rate than GDP for the foreseeable future. A significant portion of the growth in projected debt is to fund social programs such as Medicare and Social Security. Using debt held by public instead of total public debt, the debt-to-GDP ratio averaged 46% from 1946 to 2018, but reached 77% by the end of 2018. It is projected to exceed 100% within 20 years. Note that the total public debt is even higher. Most analysts put the total debt to GDP ratio at around 105%. As Walla and Furking point out, rising levels of debt elevate the risk of default. Normally, investors holding government bonds bear this risk. While governments never have to entirely pay off the debt, there are debt levels that investors might perceive as unsustainable. Enter the central bank. Walla and Furking explain how it can step in and, quote, print money in an effort to rescue the overleveraged government. Quote, while governments never have to entirely pay off debt, there are debt levels that investors might perceive as unsustainable. A solution some countries with high levels of unsustainable debt have tried is printing money. In this scenario, the government borrows money by issuing bonds and then orders the central bank to buy those bonds by creating, quote, printing money. History has taught us, however, that this type of policy leads to extremely high rates of inflation, hyperinflation, and often ends in economic ruin. The process that Walla and Furking describe is called debt monetization, and it's exactly what the Federal Reserve is doing today. Last month, the Fed announced a massive bond buying program. The Federal Reserve will buy $60 billion in short-term Treasury bills each month. According to a statement, the purchases will continue, quote, at least into the second quarter of next year. That would amount to around $400 billion worth of treasuries added to the Fed's balance sheet. But the balance sheet will likely expand even more than that. The Fed also plans to use interest it earns off of its portfolio to buy more treasuries, and as they mature, it will take that money and buy more bonds, thus pumping up the balance sheet. Powell insists this is not quantitative easing. When he announced the plan, Powell said, quote, "This is not QE. In no sense is this QE. But as Peter Schiff said, this is precisely QE, no matter what you call it." In effect, quantitative easing is a fancy term for printing lots of money. The Fed doesn't literally have a printing press in the basement of the Eccles building running off dollar bills, but it generates the same practical effect. The Federal Reserve digitally creates money out of thin air and uses the new dollars to buy securities and government bonds, thereby putting cash directly into circulation. QE not only boosts the amount of money in the economy, it also has a secondary function. As the Federal Reserve buys U.S. Treasury bonds, it monetizes government debt. We've seen this song and dance before. The Federal Reserve ran 3 rounds of quantitative easing in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. When the then Fed chair, Ben Bernanke, launched QE, he insists the Fed was not monetizing debt. He said the difference between debt monetization and the Fed's policy was that the central bank was not providing a permanent source of financing. He said that the treasuries would only remain on the Fed's balance sheet temporarily. He assured Congress that once the crisis was over, the Federal Reserve would sell the bonds it bought during the emergency. That didn't happen, and now we're back to QE. In fact, the Fed's balance sheet is currently expanding faster than it did during the rounds of QE after the Great Recession. Wola and Firking assure us everything will be fine here in the U.S. We don't have to worry about hyperinflation because we have an independent central bank. You can decide for yourself whether you believe in this mythical Fed independence. Regardless, the central bank can only fool markets for so long. Ultimately, the national debt depends on investor willingness to buy government bonds. Peter said he doesn't believe the Fed will be able to pull off this ruse again. Investors may expect QE4 to be like QE3, but here's a big difference. Quote, "You see, when the Fed did QE, investors were still foolish enough to believe that was the last time they were going to do it. They actually bought the Fed when the Fed said they had an exit strategy. They were going to shrink their balance sheet. They were going to normalize interest rates. The markets were looking forward to that, and they thought that what the Fed was doing was working. But it didn't work. It was an abject failure. That's why they're doing it again. But soon the markets are going to discover that QE is permanent, and that there's never going to be a real reduction in the balance sheet. The balance sheet is going to grow into perpetuity, and I think we're going to have a dollar crisis. I think we're going to have a sovereign debt crisis. I think this is going to end very poorly for people who have been enjoying paper gains in this stock market bubble." And that was on Peter Schiff's website, Schiff Gold. And does this have comments? I always like reading those. Nope, no comments. But yeah, this is why cryptocurrencies even exist, is because unlike the Federal Reserve, we can't just simply print off more cryptocurrency. We actually have to earn it by mining for it. Somebody has to earn it by mining for it. And they're not mining against themselves, they're mining against you. Someday people are going to understand this, and I believe it's going to be relatively soon. That we're going to understand exactly what the fuck is going on with regard to the Federal Reserve. And I think the only reason why it's not more apparent in cryptocurrency markets is because of stable coins, basically. Is that stable coins are allowing the Federal Reserve and other banks to artificially manipulate the prices of Bitcoin. And I've explained this multiple times on this show, but I believe that is the only reason why the NYAG is being so reticent and complacent about getting Tether shut down. Because they are in fact working as proxies for the New York Fed. They are keeping Bitcoin artificially cheap. They are keeping altcoins artificially cheap by manipulating the exchange rate at the US dollar. And they're doing it with stable coins. People forget how limited in scope cryptocurrency markets really are. But I'm going to tell you right now that there is going to be a liquidity crisis in cryptocurrencies. And I think we're already starting to see this, where stable coins are starting to lose their stability. I was looking, it was either sometime today or sometime yesterday, I noticed that Tether itself was off by over 1%. It's the most widely used stablecoin. As a matter of fact, the traffic for Tether transactions exceeds Bitcoin transactions, exceeds Ethereum transactions. As a matter of fact, is the highest volume traded cryptocurrency on the planet. And it isn't even a fucking cryptocurrency. But it's trading at a higher volume than Bitcoin or anything else. And I believe this represents the beginning of a vast liquidity crisis on the fiat side of cryptocurrencies. That we are going to see an increased migration of people into cryptocurrencies out of, if nothing else, desperation. But you know what? Those motherfuckers are going to want some security. And they are going to be doing their fucking homework. And when they find out that Bitcoin can't do what they need it to do, they're going to use other coins that can. And that's all there is to it. Let's go ahead and throw back down into some music. And as far as what to go with, I got some Red Fang going here. And I think it's appropriate. Blood Like Cream here on Coin Metal. Let me rewind it all the way, if I can. Every once in a while when I do stuff like this, it hangs this program. Let's go for it. And that was Anthrax with The Giant. I'm going to turn this down just a teeny tiny. Man, I love this little volume thing I've got. Yeah, I had a hardware issue not too long ago where my power went out. And when it did, the pop from when it happened took out my speakers. So when I got a new set of speakers, it came with this stupid little volume adjuster. And at first I thought, I'm probably going to end up throwing this thing away. But I plugged it in, just to see. And it's really cool. It's like right there on my desk. I just manipulate that thing with my middle finger. I want to turn off, turn up. It's pretty fucking cool. So I'm not going to complain. I'm sold on the little volume knob. Anywho, what we're going to get into for the rest of this episode, I want to follow that Shift Gold article up with the source. This is actually from the St. Louis Fed, research.st Louis or stlouisfed.org, making sense of the national debt. This is by Scott A. Wolf and Caitlin Frerking. Man, that's weird. My apologies, Caitlin. That the spelling of your last name is frerking me up. Anyway, so yes, penis and no penis. Blessed are the young, for they shall inherit the national debt. Herbert Hoover. We live in a world of scarcity. Not really. Which means that our wants exceed the resources required to fulfill them. For many of this, a household budget constrains how many goods and services we can buy. But what if we want to consume more goods and services than our budget allows? We can borrow against future income to fulfill our wants now. This type of spending, when your spending exceeds your income, is called deficit spending. The downside of borrowing money, of course, is that you must repay it with interest. So you will have less money to buy goods and services in the future. Governments face the same dilemma. They too can run a deficit or borrow against future income to fulfill more of their citizens' wants now. For a variety of reasons, governments may borrow rather than fund spending with current taxes. Deficit spending can be used to invest in infrastructure, education, research and development, and other programs intended to boost future productivity. Because this type of investment can increase productive capacity, it can also increase national income over time, and deficit spending can be used to create demand for goods and services during recessions. For the U.S. government, deficit spending has become the norm. In the past 90 years, it has run 76 annual deficits and only 14 annual surpluses. In the past 50 years, it has only run 4 annual surpluses. The accumulation of past deficits and surpluses is the current national debt. Deficits add to the debt, while surpluses subtract from the debt. At the end of the first quarter of 2019, the total national debt, also called the total U.S. federal public debt, was $22 trillion and growing. This circumstance raises important questions. How much debt can an economy sustain? Where are the long-term risks of high debt levels? Who owns the national debt? While individuals borrow from financial institutions, the U.S. federal government borrows by selling U.S. Treasury securities, bills, notes, and bonds to, quote, the public. For example, when investors purchase newly issued U.S. Treasury securities, they are lending their money to the U.S. government. The purchaser may receive periodic payments and/or a final payment, known as the face value, at the end of the term. You or someone close to you likely holds U.S. Treasury securities either directly in an investment portfolio or indirectly through a mutual fund or pension account. As such, you or they own U.S. government debt. But as a taxpayer, you are also beholden to pay part of that debt. A majority of the national debt is held by, quote, the public, which includes individuals, corporations, state or local governments, Federal Reserve banks, and foreign governments. In other words, debt held by the public includes U.S. government debt held by any entity except the U.S. federal government itself. The largest public holders of U.S. government debt are international investors, 40%, domestic private investors, 38%, Federal Reserve banks, 15%, and state and local governments, 6%. That should be like completely inverted. In addition to owing money to, quote, the public, the U.S. government also owes money to departments within the U.S. government. For example, the Social Security system has run surpluses for many years. The amount collected through the Social Security tax was greater than the benefits paid out, and the money in a trust fund. And placed the money in a trust fund. These surpluses were used to purchase U.S. Treasury securities. Forecasts suggest that as the population ages and demographics change, the amount paid in Social Security benefits will exceed the revenues collected through the Social Security tax, and the money saved in the trust fund will be needed to fill the gap. In short, some of the $22 trillion in total debt is intergovernmental holdings, money that the government owes itself. Of the total national debt, $5.8 trillion is intergovernmental holdings, and the remaining $16.2 trillion is debt held by the public. Because debt held by the public represents debt payments external to the government, many economists feel it is a better measure of the debt burden. Household and government financing over the life cycle. The life cycle theory of consumption and savings holds that households seek to smooth their consumption of goods and services over the life cycle by borrowing early in life for college or to buy a home, and then saving and paying down the debt. Oh, where is it? I had to make an adjustment there. Saving and paying down the debt during their working careers, and finally living on their savings during their retirement. Financial advisors often suggest that people try to be debt-free before they retire. As such, people are often motivated in their prime working years to pay down their debts and then pay them off entirely before they quit working. Given this mindset, people often assume that governmental debt must be paid in full at some point. But there are important differences between government debt and household debt. While people tend to prefer to pay off their debts before they retire and stop earning income or die, governments endure indefinitely. In general, governments expect that their economies will continue to grow and that they will continue to collect tax revenue. If governments need to refinance past debts or to cover new deficits, they can simply borrow. In effect, governments never need to pay off their debts entirely because the governments will exist indefinitely. Or at least that's what they think. However, this does not mean that debt is without cost. It is important to understand that debt is an opportunity cost. For the 2018 fiscal year, interest payments on the U.S. national debt were $523 billion. This money could have financed other projects if the debt did not exist. And of course, that $523 billion was simply the interest on the existing debt and did not pay down that debt. How much debt is too much debt? Although governments may endure indefinitely, that does not mean they can accumulate unlimited debt. Governments must have the necessary income to finance their debt. Economists use gross domestic product, GDP, the total market value expressed in dollars of all goods and services produced in an economy in a given year, as a measure of national income. Because GDP indicates national income, it also indicates the potential income that can be taxed, and taxes are a primary source of government revenues. In this way, a nation's GDP determines how much debt can be supported, which is similar to how a person's income determines how much debt that person can reasonably take on. And just a side note on this, when you take electricity and hardware and bandwidth and you dedicate it to mining, those funds that you create, those rewards that you're awarded as the block producer who gets their block in first, are not counted in the national income. Continuing on. Because GDP indicates national income, it also indicates the potential income that can be taxed, and taxes are a primary source of government revenues. In this way, a nation's GDP determines how much debt can be supported, meaning that your Bitcoin that you mined cannot be borrowed against by the government. Continuing on, which is similar to how a person's income determines how much debt that person can reasonably take on. Just as individuals can sustain higher debt as their income increases, economies can sustain higher debt when the economy grows over time. However, if debt grows at a faster rate than income, eventually the debt might become unsustainable. Economists use the debt-to-GDP ratio to measure how sustainable the debt is. Some economists, referred to as owls, suggest that people's worries about U.S. government debt are overblown. See the boxed insert, deficit hawks, doves, and owls. Yeah, okay. The federal debt held by the public as percentage of gross domestic product. Federal debt held by the public has grown faster than GDP, leading to a rising debt-to-GDP ratio. Note, gray bars indicate... this is notices about this graph here. Deficit hawks, doves, and owls. You might have heard of deficit hawks, those who seek spending constraints to rein in deficits, and doves, those willing to accommodate higher levels of deficit spending to accomplish fiscal goals. But the new kids on the blocks are owls. Owls suggest that worries about government deficit spending are relics of a bygone age. They say that our ideas on government spending and deficits date back to the gold standard era, where a limited quantity of gold constrained the money supply. Rather, owls suggest that a government that controls the fiat money system controls the fiat money system is not constrained because it can simply create more money to pay its debts. They see no need to worry about balancing the budget. While these views are being discussed among economists, they don't reflect the consensus of the profession. In a recent poll, 88% of surveyed economists disagreed with the idea that, quote, countries that borrow in their own currency should not worry about government deficits because they can always create money to finance their debt. And that's by Jeff Stein. These economists say that $1 trillion deficits is just a good start. Yeah, I don't believe that. Dude, ask like Venezuela how good they feel about their government debt. The Government Accounting Office, GAO, suggests that the U.S. government debt is currently on an unsustainable path. The federal debt is projected to grow at a faster rate than GDP for the foreseeable future. A significant portion of the growth in projected debt is to fund social programs such as Medicare and Social Security. Using debt held by the public instead of total public debt, the debt to GDP ratio averaged 46% from 1946 to 2018, but reached 77% by the end of 2018. It is projected to exceed 100% within 20 years. Debt risks. Credit risk is the risk to the lender that the borrower will not repay the loan. It is one component of the interest rate that borrowers pay. Like for all loans, interest rates on Treasury securities reflect risk of default. The higher the risk of default, the higher the interest rate investors will expect. A country perceived as a higher credit risk must pay bondholders higher interest rates than a country perceived as a lower credit risk. All else equal, thus when bond yields spike, it might reflect rising risk. Economist Herb Stein once said, quote, if something cannot go on forever, it will stop. In other words, trends that are unsustainable will not continue because the economy will adjust, sometimes in abrupt and jarring ways. While governments never have to entirely pay off debt, there are debt levels that investors might perceive as unsustainable. A solution some countries with high levels of unsustainable debt have tried is printing money. In this scenario, the government borrows money by issuing bonds and then orders the central bank to pay those bonds by creating, quote, printing money. History has taught us, however, that this type of policy leads to extremely high rates of inflation and often leads to economic ruin, or often ends in economic ruin. Some of the better known examples of such policies are Germany in 1921 through 23, Zimbabwe in 2007 through 2009, and Venezuela currently. An important protection against this type of policy is to create an independent central bank that is insulated from the political process and has clear objectives, such as a specific target for the inflation rate, so that it can make policy decisions to sustain economic health over the long run rather than respond to political pressures. Gosh, that sounds a hell of a lot like Bitcoin and its set issuance rate. Conclusions. The national debt is high by historical standards and rising. People often assume that governments must pay off their debts in the same way that individuals do. However, there are important differences. Governments and their economies do not retire, and governments do not die, or don't intend to. As long as their debt payments remain sustainable, governments can finance their debt indefinitely. And if a government prints money to solve its debt problem, history warns that hyperinflation and financial ruin will likely result. While debt in itself isn't a bad thing, it can become dangerous if it becomes unsustainable. Yeah, I believe this is dead on. However, I find it kind of funny that they don't point out that this transition has already started for some people, where we have set up individual banks, individual separate banks, central banks rather, but they're not all that centralized. And this is where these centralized coins that we always hear about, like when you hear about people talking in terms of blockchain, they're talking about one of two things. They're either talking about doing their transactions solely on like a side chain or in a lightning type situation, completely off chain, right? Or they're talking about doing their own little quote unquote blockchain amongst their own in-house miners. Now, the problem with both of these solutions is this. Number one, off-chain transactions are dependent upon on-chain transactions. And let me repeat that. Off-chain transactions are dependent upon on-chain transactions. So for all of the off-chain traffic that's going on a side chain or on fucking Lightning Network or any of that other bullshit, there is a corresponding, or at least one corresponding transaction on chain and available to everybody to see. Now, if it's identifiable what the status is of that transaction, the person that is intending to attack it knows what their time window is. And because it is an unsettled transaction, they could settle it themselves if they figured out how. Now, I'm not saying that it's easy. I'm saying it's theoretically possible. And that's something that you do not have with an off-chain transaction. An on-chain transaction. When an on-chain transaction is verified and included in a block by miners, it is done. The monetary value has gone from one entity to another, and it is settled. As far as the rest of the planet is concerned, that transaction is done. However, with regard to an off-chain transaction, or an on-chain transaction that sets it up for off-chain transactions, that's not a settled transaction until there is a corresponding closing transaction, like in the case with Lightning Network payment channels. that there will be a settling transaction that will settle all of the swapping back and forth of monetary value that happened on that payment channel in the time that it was open. Now, the danger here is that the transaction isn't in an indefinite state for only 10 minutes. It can be set up to be close in an indefinite period of time. So that means that an attacker has an indefinite period of time to close that transaction out for everybody else. And I know this. I know there's some in the Bitcoin sphere that are probably listening to this and just like, no, it's not that easy. Hey, I didn't say it was easy. I said it was possible. And again, that's something that's not possible with the traditional Bitcoin transaction. And this is a fact that people are going to find out. You know, I've talked about this multiple times on this show, but it's introducing a liability where one doesn't need to exist. And you know, that kind of position requires a lot of trust. And that person that's involved in it has to have a lot of liquidity, enough to not only cover the transactions that they're doing off-chain for everybody else, you know, because they have to tie up an associated volume of Bitcoin that they expect to be transacting in that payment channel. But also, if there's an issue with that volume, that they need to be able to replace it and settle to all of the people that got fucked over when that transaction got closed out by an adversarial actor. You know, I know it doesn't sound like something that's, you know, when I'm saying something like that, I feel like I'm attacking Bitcoin in some way, but I'm not really. Because there's nothing in the fucking Bitcoin white paper about Lightning Network. And as a matter of fact, if you read it and you really understand what the fuck he's talking about, you understand very clearly that he did not intend for you to need a third-party participant to convey to settle your transactions for you. That he intended for all of us to be doing our transactions on chain. I don't think there's actually a block size limit included in the Bitcoin white paper, and I don't think block time was in there either. That's something that was kind of included later on, I think. I'm not entirely sure on that. I'd have to refer back to it to ascertain it completely. But the point being that it's not a coincidence that people that are trying to drive people to using exclusively Bitcoin as the cryptocurrency, the blockchain, that these are the same people that are talking down projects like Ethereum Classic, and a half dozen other cryptocurrency projects that are modeled similarly. And it's because these are competition for them. They cannot deal with competition. They cannot force you to operate solely with them if they have competition. That means at some point or another you could say, you know what? These transaction fees are a bit high and I don't want to pay them anymore. And go to another altcoin or another cryptocurrency wholly. They don't want that to be an option for you. They want you to be so fucking locked in that you just have to fucking deal with it. If they decide at some point in the future that, you know what, 21 million Bitcoin, that's just not enough. We're going to adjust the inflation rate and we're going to adjust the total cap of Bitcoin that will ever be created. And again, you won't have any choice at that point because they'll have made altcoins somehow illegal or some bullshit like that. But I don't see that future coming clear. As a matter of fact, I've pretty much always believed that altcoins would start And as a matter of fact, it was only affirmed by Purecoin, Filecoin, those guys. When I saw those coming out at first, I was like, oh my gosh, what the fuck? Those guys are going to, they're just going to copy everything that Bitcoin did to date and do their own thing. What the fuck's going to happen to the Bitcoin that I own? And then I really thought about that. And I'm like, wait a minute now. Okay, so Satoshi Nakamoto gave us an alternative to the US dollar. And these guys are giving us an alternative to what Satoshi provided. So what's any different? What's the difference here? Before it was just Federal Reserve notes, and then Satoshi provided some competition for Federal Reserve notes. And now other people are providing competition for even Satoshi. What's the difference? There is no difference. The only difference is where it should be, is between your own ears. You. You should be the one deciding, do I want my monetary value stored in US dollars or Federal Reserve notes, as the case may be, or Litecoin, or Ethereum, or Monero, or Verge, or Doge? Where do I want to put my monetary value? Where is it more advantageous to me to store my monetary value? And if that answer isn't Bitcoin, you shouldn't feel bad about it. Because that's not somebody else's decision to make for you. That is your decision to make. And the further we go along with this whole cryptocurrency experiment, I believe the more plain that truth will be to a lot more people. That we do not have to endure the abrupt and jarring ways that a central bank adjusts their policy or a government adjusts their policies and has a massive impact on the amount of monetary value that we have to convey. If they devalue the dollars that it's held in, they have devalued that volume. It's no longer worth what it was. But if over time the printer, the issuer of the currency is issuing less currency, that means invariably over time that it's going to increase in relative value terms. It's a pretty good thing that it's got 8 zeros by default on the right side of that decimal point, because that means it's divisible by 100 million points. Satoshis, that is. But yeah. So I think it's really hilarious. It's like these guys with their fucking the Green New Deal. I'm sure you've probably heard about it somewhere. Anyway, I read some stuff about the Green New Deal, and it seems that they really want to focus this all back into mass transit. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? I'm watching videos on YouTube of kids making air blowers, leaf blowers. You go down to the hardware store and buy a fucking leaf blower, making one of those fly. If a fucking leaf blower can fly, why can't I? I don't get it. They manage sustained flight with a fucking leaf blower. It's incredible, right? But in an age where you can make a fucking leaf blower fly, these assholes want us to go back to mass transit. Are you fucking kidding me? It's the same thing with cryptocurrencies. We live in an age where your next door neighbor has as much power as fucking Jerome Powell, the head of the fucking Federal Reserve. At will, your next door neighbor's kid could copy the fucking source code for whatever version of Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency that's out there that they want. Maybe they adjust the monetary policies a little bit, change the issuance schedule, that kind of thing, right? They can issue it tomorrow, and it's up to the rest of us to decide whether it's worth it to use it as money. And if enough of us decide that it's viable competition to Bitcoin, that's what's going to fucking happen. And there isn't anything that Bitcoin Core or a central bank or a government can fucking do about it. that is the reality that we're living in. And don't let anybody fucking convince you otherwise. It is with that, I want to throw it back down into some music. And I heard this song playing in the background, and I don't play it enough because I do love it so. It's by one of the bands that I kind of grew up on, but it's actually a newer song by them, and it's called Kick the Chair, and it's by Megadeth, here on Coin Metal. And that was Slipknot with Disaster Piece. And it is with that I'd like to close out this episode. Thank you very much for listening. I certainly do appreciate the support. We will be back again on Friday at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And so until then, I want y'all to trade safe. Do your homework. And watch out for your own bunghole, because nobody else is going to do it for you. And as far as our last dance is concerned, I haven't picked anything out. But I haven't played anything by Static X today, and that's a travesty. It's got to be. We got to do it. And so, yeah, as far as our last dance is concerned, I think I'm going to have to do it. A little bit of Static X. And so for the last dance, Push It, here on Coin Metal. Thank you again for listening, and you all have an excellent evening. Good night.